My name is Margaret Hill. I'm 52 years old, and I've rented homes responsibly for over 3 decades. I've never missed a rent payment, never damaged a property, never left a landlord chasing me down. I worked the same job for 21 years, raised my family, paid my bills on time, and followed the rules, because I believed that if you did things the right way, you'd be treated fairly in return. That belief shattered the day my landlord looked me in the eye and told me he was keeping my deposit. I was standing in my empty apartment, keys on the counter, watching him walk through rooms I'd scrubbed until my hands were raw. Every wall was spotless. Every floor gleamed. I'd even repaired small things that were broken when I moved in, a loose cabinet hinge, a cracked light switch cover. He circled the living room slowly, hands in his pockets, looking for problems that didn't exist. Finally, he turned to me with a smirk that made my stomach drop. I'm keeping the deposit. Damage to the walls, carpet wear, general cleaning fees. My voice came out steady despite the shock. There's no damage. I have photos from move-in day showing everything was already worn. He shrugged. That's your word against mine. The deposit stays with me. That's $1,200. That's illegal. His smirk widened. Then take me to court if you can afford it. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. The words hit like a physical blow. If you can afford it. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew I was a middle-aged woman living alone, recently divorced, starting over in a cheaper apartment across town. He knew $1,200 was significant to me. And he knew most people in my position would swallow the loss rather than fight a legal battle they couldn't afford. I stood frozen, watching him pocket my keys like he'd won something. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd dismissed me. Counted me out before I'd even tried to fight back. Assumed I was too old, too tired, too broke to challenge him. Anything else? He asked, already heading toward the door. No, I said quietly. Nothing else. He left without another word. I stood in that empty apartment for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, feeling something cold and hard forming in my chest. Not just anger. Something sharper. More focused. That deposit wasn't just money. It was my emergency fund after the divorce. My safety net while I rebuilt my life at an age when starting over felt impossible. He'd taken it knowing exactly what it meant to me. I picked up my phone and took one final photo of the pristine apartment. Then I walked out, locking the door behind me for the last time. But I wasn't walking away from this. Not even close. The drive to my new place was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel as reality sank in. $1,200 gone. Just like that. Stolen legally, because the system favored landlords over tenants, property owners over people just trying to survive. That money had been my cushion. The thing that let me sleep at night knowing if my car broke down or I got sick, I had something to fall back on. Now it was in the pocket of a man who owned 3 buildings and drove a luxury sedan. I thought about calling my daughter, but I already knew what she'd say. Mom, just let it go. It's not worth the stress. Everyone would say the same thing. Friends, family, coworkers, they'd all tell me to move on. That fighting would cost more than I'd recover. That men like him always won. The worst part? A small voice inside me agreed with them. I was 52, starting over in a studio apartment, working a job that barely covered my bills. What chance did I have against someone with resources and connections? But then I remembered his smirk. That casual cruelty. The way he looked at me like I was nothing. When I got to my new apartment, I dug through my moving boxes until I found the folder labeled Rental Documents. Inside was my lease, signed a year ago, along with every email exchange we'd ever had. I spread them across my small kitchen table and started reading. Really reading, not just skimming. And that's when I noticed something interesting. The lease had inconsistencies. Small things most people would never catch. A clause about security deposits that referenced a state law incorrectly. A section about property maintenance that contradicted itself 2 pages later. And most interesting, the deposit receipt had my landlord's signature, but it was dated 3 days after I'd actually paid. None of it was smoking gun evidence. but it showed carelessness, sloppiness, the kind of mistake someone made when they'd done something so many times they stopped paying attention to details. I pulled up the state's landlord-tenant laws on my laptop and started cross-referencing. My landlord, his name was Kenneth Winters, had violated at least 3 provisions. The deposit had to be held in a separate escrow account. He was required to provide an itemized list of damages within 30 days. And he couldn't charge for normal wear and tear. I had documentation proving the apartment was in perfect condition. I had timestamps on my emails. I had everything I needed to file a formal complaint. But something stopped me from acting immediately. A quiet instinct that said don't show your hand too early. Don't let him know you're fighting back until you've gathered all your ammunition. So I saved the documents, closed my laptop, and went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about Kenneth Winters and his careless contracts and his assumption that I'd just disappear quietly. He'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated me. The next morning, I told my coworker Helen about the deposit. She shook her head sympathetically while pouring coffee in the break room. "Margaret, I hate to say it, but you should probably let this go. Landlords like him have lawyers on retainer. You'll spend more fighting than you'd ever get back." "Maybe," I said noncommittally. My sister tried to sue her landlord once. Spent 8 months in small claims court and lost anyway. The stress nearly killed her. Helen touched my arm gently. "You're already dealing with so much. The divorce is the move. Don't make it harder on yourself." I thanked her for the advice and went back to my desk. But her words echoed in my head all day. Everyone's first instinct was to tell me I'd lose. That he was too rich, too powerful, too protected by a system designed to favor him. Maybe they were right. Maybe I would lose. But something stubborn had taken root inside me. A refusal to accept that people like Kenneth could just take from people like me without consequences. That evening, I did something I rarely did. I ignored everyone's advice. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not angry rants or threatening emails. Just calm, factual documentation of everything that had happened. Date moved in. Condition of apartment. Photos taken. Maintenance requests submitted and ignored. Move-out inspection. His refusal to return my deposit. Every detail, time-stamped and organized. If I was going to fight, I'd do it the right way. Carefully. Methodically. With evidence he couldn't dispute. Over the next week, I became obsessed with documentation. I created spreadsheets. I organized emails chronologically. I printed photos and labeled them. My tiny apartment started to look like a detective's office, papers spread across every surface. I found patterns I hadn't noticed before. 3 separate maintenance requests I'd submitted. A leaking faucet, a broken window lock, a cracked bathroom tile, all ignored for months. Each one documented in emails he'd never responded to. Then I found something interesting online. A public database of tenant complaints filed with the city's housing authority. I searched Kenneth Winters' name and sat back, shocked. 7 complaints in the past 3 years. All from different tenants. All involving withheld security deposits, ignored repairs, or intimidation tactics. None had resulted in serious consequences, just warnings and small fines he'd probably paid without blinking. I wasn't unlucky. I wasn't the exception. I was part of a pattern. A business model built on exploiting people who couldn't fight back. My hands were shaking as I screenshot the complaint records and added them to my growing file. This wasn't just about my $1,200 anymore. This was about everyone he'd done this to. Everyone he would continue doing it to unless someone finally stood up. I picked up my phone and searched for tenant rights attorneys. Most wanted retainer fees I couldn't afford. But one website mentioned free consultations for cases involving landlord fraud. I hesitated for just a moment, finger hovering over the call button. Then I thought about his smirk and pressed dial. The attorney's name was Sharon Price. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she asked, "Do you have documentation?" "Everything. Emails, photos, the lease, copies of checks, maintenance requests." "Good. That's more than most people bring me." She paused. "I'll be honest, Margaret. Cases like this are winnable, but they take time. And Kenneth Winters isn't going to roll over easily. Are you prepared for that? Yes. Why? And I mean, really, why are you doing this? $1,200 is significant, but it's not life-changing. The stress of litigation might cost you more than the money's worth. I thought carefully before answering. Because he looked at me like I was nothing. Like I didn't matter. And I'm tired of men like him getting away with it. Sharon smiled slightly. That's the right answer. Let me review your documents. I'll call you back in a few days. After hanging up, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Not certainty. I knew this could still fall apart. But at least I'd taken a real step forward. That evening my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello. Is this Margaret Hale? A woman's voice, professional but friendly. Yes. My name is Bethany Cole. I rented from Kenneth Winters 2 years ago. I found your name in a tenant rights forum and wanted to reach out. I heard you're fighting him over a deposit. My pulse quickened. I am. Good. Because you should know what you're up against. Bethany and I talked for over an hour. She'd rented from Kenneth for 18 months, kept the place immaculate, and still lost her entire deposit when she moved out. She tried to fight it, filed a complaint with the housing authority, but eventually gave up when Kenneth's lawyer threatened to countersue for damages she hadn't caused. He does this to everyone, Bethany said. Especially women living alone. Single mothers, divorcees, older women. People he thinks won't fight back. She paused. Did he tell you to take him to court if you could afford it? My breath caught. Word for word. He says that to everyone. It's his closing line. Makes him feel powerful. Bitterness edged her voice. What he doesn't tell you is that his buildings are falling apart. The one I lived in had code violations stacked up. The heating barely worked. He just keeps collecting rent and deposits while doing minimal maintenance. Did you report the violations? I tried. The city sent an inspector once, issued a warning. Kenneth paid a small fine and nothing changed. She sighed. I'm telling you this so you know what you're dealing with. He's not going to play fair. He's going to try to intimidate you until you give up. I'm not giving up. Good. Because someone needs to actually beat him. She hesitated. There's one more thing you should know. When I was moving out, I overheard him on the phone with his accountant. He was arguing about something financial. It sounded serious, but I didn't think much of it at the time. After we hung up, I sat thinking about that detail. Financial problems. Kenneth drove an expensive car and owned multiple properties, but that didn't mean he was actually solvent. People could look successful while drowning in debt. I filed that information away and returned to my documentation. 3 weeks after our conversation, Sharon Price called me back. I filed a formal complaint on your behalf with the housing authority. Based on your documentation and the pattern of complaints against Winters, they're opening an official review. What does that mean? It means they're going to audit his properties. Check for code compliance, review his deposit practices, make sure he's following landlord-tenant law. It won't get your money back directly, but it puts pressure on him. She paused. And Margaret? They're taking this seriously. Your documentation was exceptional. I felt a flicker of validation. All those hours organizing files, all those spreadsheets, they'd mattered. What happens next? We wait. The city moves slowly, but they move. In the meantime, don't contact Kenneth directly. Let everything go through official channels. I agreed and hung up, feeling cautiously optimistic. Then 2 days later, I received an email that made my heart skip. From Kenneth Winters. Subject: Let's resolve this. Margaret, I understand you filed some kind of complaint with the city. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to discuss returning a portion of your deposit to avoid unnecessary hassle for both of us. Please call me at your convenience. I read it 3 times, anger building with each pass. A portion. Not the full amount he'd illegally withheld. Just enough to make the problem go away. And that word, hassle. Like my stolen money was an inconvenience for him. I forwarded the email to Sharon without responding. She called within an hour. Don't reply. This is him realizing he might actually face consequences. Let him sweat. So I did. I ignored his email and went about my life. But something had shifted. Kenneth was nervous. And nervous people made mistakes. A week later, Kenneth emailed again. This time, the tone was friendlier, almost casual. Margaret, I haven't heard back from you. I'm willing to return $600 as a gesture of goodwill. I think we can both agree that's fair and saves us both the trouble of legal proceedings. Let me know by Friday. I felt my jaw clench. $600, exactly half of what he owed me. And that deadline, that subtle pressure to respond quickly before I had time to think. Sharon's response was immediate when I forwarded it, classic intimidation tactic. He's trying to make you feel like half is better than nothing. Don't respond. Let Friday pass. Friday came and went. Kenneth sent one more email, this one with an edge of irritation barely concealed beneath polite words. Margaret, I'm disappointed you're choosing to be unreasonable about this. I made a good faith offer. If you continue down this path, I'll have no choice but to defend myself vigorously. Legal costs can add up quickly, as I'm sure you're aware, *. There was the threat. Thinly veiled, but clear enough. Fight me and I'll bury you in legal fees. I forwarded it to Sharon and waited for her response. When she called, she was smiling. I could hear it in her voice. He's panicking. People don't make threats when they're confident. They make threats when they're scared. So what do? We wait. The housing authority audit is happening. He knows it. And he knows if they find violations, his problems get much bigger than your deposit. I felt a small, fierce satisfaction. For the first time, Kenneth Winters wasn't in complete control. And he hated it. Just when things seemed to be moving in the right direction, my temporary housing situation fell apart. The studio apartment I'd rented month to month was being sold. The new owner wanted to renovate and flip it. I had 30 days to find somewhere else. I sat on my bed, head in my hands, feeling the weight of everything crashing down. The fight with Kenneth. The stress of moving again. The constant financial pressure of starting over at 52. It felt like the universe was punishing me for standing up for myself. I called my daughter that night and broke down crying for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Mom, she said gently, maybe this is a sign. Maybe you should just take his $600 and move on. You're making yourself sick over this. I can't, I whispered. If I give up now, he wins. And everyone like him keeps winning forever. She sighed. I love you, Mom. I just don't want to see you destroy yourself over pride. After we hung up, I sat in the dark feeling utterly defeated. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I should just accept the loss and rebuild. Fighting wasn't worth my health, my peace of mind, my sanity. Then, the next morning, something arrived in my mail that changed everything. It was a legal notice, official city letterhead. But it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Kenneth Winters, sent to my old apartment address. The postal service had forwarded it to my new place by mistake. I opened it, heart pounding, and read, Notice of default on property taxes and pending foreclosure proceedings. My hands started shaking. Kenneth's building, the one I just moved out of, was in serious financial trouble. I read the notice 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Kenneth had failed to pay property taxes for 18 months. The city had issued warnings. He'd ignored them. Now they were moving forward with foreclosure proceedings unless he paid the full amount owed, plus penalties and interest, within 60 days. The total was staggering. Over $40,000. I sat stunned, processing what this meant. Kenneth Winters, who owned multiple buildings and drove a luxury car, who'd stolen my deposit and countless others because he could, was drowning in debt. All that arrogance, all that confidence. It was a facade covering financial disaster. Part of me wanted to celebrate. Karma was real. He was finally facing consequences. But another part of me just felt calculating. There was something here. An opportunity one didn't fully understand yet. I took photos of the notice and forwarded them to Sharon. Then I did something I'd never done before in my life. I started researching foreclosure procedures. I learned how buildings changed hands when owners defaulted. I learned about auctions, about bidding processes, about how investors scooped up distressed properties for pennies on the dollar. I spent hours reading forums, watching videos, understanding a system I'd never had reason to explore before. By midnight, I had a crazy idea forming. An idea so improbable I almost laughed. But it wouldn't leave my mind. So I kept researching, kept calculating, kept wondering, what if? The next morning I called Sharon. I need to ask you something confidential. If Kenneth's building goes to foreclosure auction, could I bid on it? Silence on the other end. Then, theoretically, yes. Anyone can bid. But Margaret, foreclosure auctions require cash. We're talking tens of thousands minimum. How much would this building likely go for? More silence. Let me look into it. But I have to ask why. Just curious, I said. But I wasn't just curious. I was obsessed. I started looking at my finances with fresh eyes. My retirement account had grown steadily over 21 years at my job. Not wealthy, but substantial. There were rules about early withdrawal, penalties to consider, but it was possible to access the money for certain investments. I called my financial advisor, a patient man named Bernard who'd helped me set up my retirement plan decades ago. Bernard, hypothetically, if I wanted to use retirement funds to purchase property, what would that look like? He walked me through the process. Self-directed IRAs, real estate investments, the penalties, the restrictions, the risks. Margaret, I have to be clear, this is not something I'd recommend for someone in your situation. The risk is significant. But it's legal? Yes. Legal, but risky. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. I had enough. Not comfortably, not without risk, but enough to potentially bid at a foreclosure auction if the price stayed reasonable. This was insane. I'd never invested in real estate. Never taken a risk larger than changing jobs. I was supposed to be rebuilding my life carefully, conservatively, the way responsible 52-year-old women were supposed to. But I kept thinking about Kenneth's smirk. About every tenant he'd exploited. About his assumption that people like me would always lose. I made an appointment with Bernard for later that week. Bernard's office was small but professional, diplomas on the wall, financial charts scattered across his desk. He looked at me seriously when I sat down. Margaret, before we go any further, I need you to think very carefully about what you're considering. You'd be taking your retirement savings, your safety net, and gambling it on a property auction. I know. If this goes wrong, you could lose everything. At your age, there's no time to rebuild. I understand. He studied my face. Why are you really doing this? I thought about lying, about giving him some rational explanation involving investment potential or financial strategy. Instead, I told him the truth. Because my landlord stole from me. Because he's done it to dozens of people. Because he looked at me like I was nothing and assumed I'd never fight back. This building going to auction is the universe handing me a chance to prove him wrong. Bernard was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a calculator. Okay, let's look at the numbers. But I'm putting every risk in writing, and you're signing acknowledgement that you understand what you're doing. We spent 3 hours going through scenarios. Best case, worst case, middle case. How much I could safely withdraw. What penalties I'd face. What the property might realistically sell for. What I'd do with it if I actually won. By the end, my head was spinning. But one number stood out. If the auction price stayed under $35,000, I could do it. Barely. With careful planning and significant risk. Bernard printed everything, made me initial each page, and asked one final time, "Are you absolutely sure?" I thought about my empty apartment. My stolen deposit. Kenneth's smirk. Yes, I'm sure. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I had 21 days to prepare. Financially, legally, emotionally. I barely slept. I reviewed numbers until they blurred together. I read every document Bernard gave me twice. My daughter called. "Mom, what's this I hear about you investing in property?" I told Bernard he couldn't discuss my finances with anyone, but my daughter had visited his office for her own planning, and apparently he'd mentioned in passing that I was considering a significant investment. She'd put 2 and 2 together. "It's complicated," I said. "Mom, please tell me you're not doing something reckless." "I'm being very careful. This is about that landlord, isn't it? About the deposit." She sighed. "Mom, revenge isn't worth destroying your retirement." "It's not revenge," I said quietly. "It's justice." "There's a difference?" "Yes. Revenge is emotional. Justice is systematic. I'm not doing this to hurt him. I'm doing it because an opportunity presented itself and I have the means to take it. Legally. Fairly. She was quiet. You sound different. Stronger. Maybe I am. After we hung up, I returned to my preparations. Sharon had pulled public records on Kenneth's building. It was structurally sound but needed updates. New roof, electrical work, cosmetic improvements. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to keep the auction price reasonable. Bernard called with updates on my fund transfers. Everything was proceeding on schedule. By auction day, I'd have $38,000 available. Enough to bid competitively if the price stayed in range. The night before the auction, I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Just paced my tiny apartment wondering if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life or the smartest decision I'd ever made. At 3 a.m., I finally collapsed into bed, and I dreamed of Kenneth's face when he realized what I'd done. The auction was held in a government building downtown, a sterile conference room with fluorescent lights and metal folding chairs. I arrived early, wearing my most professional outfit, carrying a folder with all my paperwork. My hands were shaking, but I kept my face calm. Other bidders filtered in. Real estate investors, mostly men, chatting casually like this was just another Tuesday. They looked at me briefly, dismissed me as irrelevant, and went back to their conversations. Then Kenneth walked in. He looked terrible, tired, stressed, older than I remembered. He scanned the room, probably assessing the competition. His eyes passed right over me without recognition. Why would he remember the tenant whose deposit he'd stolen? I was nobody to him. The auctioneer, a bored-looking official, called the room to order and explained the rules. Minimum bid set at $25,000. Increments of $1,000. Cash or certified check required within 48 hours of winning. My heart hammered. $25,000 was lower than I'd expected. Good for me, devastating for Kenneth. First property, the auctioneer announced. 47 Maple Street, 12-unit residential building. Opening bid $25,000. Do I hear 25? A man in the front raised his paddle. 25. Do I hear 26? Kenneth raised his paddle, voice tight. 26. 27. The first bidder again. Back and forth they went. 28. 29. 30. The number climbed steadily. Kenneth was sweating now, jaw clenched. At 33,000, the other bidder dropped out. 33 going once, the auctioneer said. Going twice. I raised my paddle. 34. The room shifted. Heads turned. Kenneth's eyes found me for the first time, and I watched recognition dawn slowly on his face. His mouth opened slightly. Confusion first, then disbelief. 34,000, the auctioneer confirmed. Do I hear 35? Kenneth raised his paddle, but his hand was shaking. 35. The auctioneer looked at me. I'd prepared for this moment, run the numbers 100 times. I had enough for one more bid. Maybe two if I pushed my absolute limit. But Bernard's warning echoed in my mind. Don't get emotional, don't overbid just to win. Stick to your maximum. My maximum was 38,000. I had $3,000 of cushion. 36, I said clearly. Kenneth's face was white. He looked at the auctioneer, at me, at his paddle. The room was completely silent. Everyone sensed something unusual was happening, though they didn't know the backstory. 36,000, the auctioneer said. Do I hear 37? Kenneth's mouth worked soundlessly. He didn't have it. I could see it in his eyes. He'd scraped together enough for maybe one more bid, but he'd been counting on winning at 35 or less. He wasn't prepared for competition. 37, the auctioneer repeated. Kenneth lowered his paddle slowly. His shoulders sagged. He looked at me with something between rage and desperation. Going once at 36,000. The auctioneer's voice seemed to come from far away. Going twice. My heart was in my throat. This was it. The moment everything either worked or catastrophically failed. Sold. 36,000 to bidder 42. The gavel fell. The room exhaled. And I sat perfectly still, trying to process that I'd just bought a building. The next 48 hours were a blur of paperwork, certified checks, signatures, and legal reviews. Sharon handled most of it, moving through the process with professional efficiency while I sat in a daze trying to believe this was real. You did it, she kept saying. You actually did it. The building was mine. 12 units, currently 8 occupied, built in 1987, needing updates but structurally sound. And the best part? Kenneth had no legal claim to it anymore. The foreclosure had severed his ownership completely. I didn't tell him immediately. I wanted to wait for the right moment. Let him wonder what I was planning. Let him feel the uncertainty that came from not being in control. Meanwhile, I started researching property management, talking to contractors about necessary repairs, reviewing tenant files Kenneth had left behind in his hurried exit. Everything was disorganized, sloppy, just like his lease agreements. I found deposit records, or rather, the lack of them. Kenneth hadn't kept proper documentation on any security deposits, just vague notes, amounts that didn't match tenant contracts, no evidence of the required separate escrow account. More interestingly, I found complaints from current tenants about unpaid repairs, a leaking roof in Unit 7, broken heating in Unit 3, faulty wiring in Unit 11. He'd collected rent while ignoring basic maintenance, letting the building deteriorate while pocketing the difference. Reading through the files, I felt my earlier doubts fade. This wasn't revenge. This was necessary. These tenants deserved a landlord who actually cared about their living conditions. 4 days after the auction, Kenneth finally called me. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times, each voicemail progressively more desperate. Finally, I listened to the last one. Margaret, we need to talk. I know you bought my building. I don't know how you did it, but we need to talk. Please. A week later, Kenneth sent an email asking to meet. His tone was different now, careful, almost humble. The arrogance had evaporated, replaced by obvious anxiety about what I might do next. I ignored it for 3 days. Then I sent a brief reply, my office Monday at 2. My office. The words felt surreal typing them. But I'd rented a small property management office downtown, a single room with a desk and filing cabinets. Nothing fancy, but professional. Official. Monday came. Kenneth arrived exactly at 2, looking diminished somehow. He'd always seemed larger than life to me. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable. Now he just looked like a man who'd made too many bad decisions and finally run out of options. Margaret, he said, extending his hand. I didn't shake it. Just gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit. He sat. We looked at each other across the cheap desk, and I could see him trying to figure out how to play this. Should he be friendly? Apologetic? Aggressive? He'd probably intimidated countless tenants in situations like this. But now the power dynamic had flipped, and he had no script. I don't understand how you did this, he said finally. Did what? Bought the building. You didn't have that kind of money. I know what I was paying you in rent. There's no way you could afford. You assumed, I interrupted. Just like you assumed I wouldn't fight for my deposit. Just like you assumed I'd take your $600 offer. You keep assuming things about me without bothering to check if they're true. He flinched. Look, I know you're angry about the deposit. I get it. But, do you? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a document. Slid it across to him. Read it. He picked it up, eyes scanning the page. I watched his face change as he processed what he was seeing. Official county records. Ownership transfer. My name listed as sole proprietor of 47 Maple Street. This is real, he said slowly. Yes. You actually own my building. It's not your building anymore. It's mine. Legally purchased at public auction after you defaulted on property taxes. I leaned back. Funny how that works. You spend years exploiting tenants, ignoring code violations, pocketing deposits illegally. Then you can't even pay your own taxes. I had some cash flow issues. You had character issues, I corrected. You built a business model on taking advantage of people you thought were powerless. Single mothers, elderly tenants, divorced women starting over. Anyone you calculated wouldn't fight back. He opened his mouth, closed it. What do you want from me? Nothing. I don't want anything from you. Then why am I here? I pulled out another folder. Because I'm offering you something. A way out that doesn't involve lawyers, court battles, or public humiliation. He looked suspicious. What kind of way out? You still have belongings in the property manager's office on site. Files, personal items, keys to units you no longer own. I need you to clear out completely within 1 week. I paused. Do that, and I won't file formal complaints about the dozen or so illegal practices I found in your records. Unlawful deposit retention, failure to maintain habitable conditions, no proper escrow account, violations of tenant privacy. Should I continue? His face went pale. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a professional exit. You can walk away, or I can report everything and let the housing authority investigation continue. Your choice. Kenneth stared at the document in his hands, reading the header over and over like repetition might change what it said. I don't believe this. This has to be some kind of mistake. It's not. You can't just. People don't just. He struggled to form words. This was my building. I owned it for 12 years. And you ran it into the ground. Financially and literally. I kept my voice level. The roof has been leaking for 2 years. The heating system barely functions. You've ignored maintenance requests from tenants who still live here, people who trusted you to provide safe housing. I was going to fix those things. When? After you stole enough deposits to fund the repairs. I leaned forward. I've reviewed your records, Kenneth. You collected over $15,000 in security deposits over the past 3 years. None of it was held in escrow like the law requires. Most of it was never returned. You used tenant money to cover your own debts. He slumped in his chair. How did you even afford this? The auction, the legal fees. That's none of your business. This was supposed to be simple, he said, almost to himself. You were supposed to just go away. Like everyone else. I'm not everyone else. He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw genuine confusion in his eyes. Why? Why go to all this trouble over $1,200? I thought about how to answer that. About explaining what it felt like to be dismissed, to have your worth measured by how easily you could be exploited. But Kenneth wouldn't understand. Men like him never did. Because you taught me something, I said instead. You taught me that power only works on people who accept their powerlessness. The moment I stopped accepting it, you had nothing. Kenneth sat in silence for a long moment. Then, so this is revenge. You bought my building to punish me. No. I bought your building because it was a sound investment opportunity. The fact that it was your building is just poetic. I pulled out a third document. These are the code violations I found. 23 of them. Some minor, some serious. I'm required by law to fix them within 6 months. That'll cost roughly $18,000 according to the contractor quotes I've received. Which is fine. I budgeted for it. He stared at me like I was speaking another language. You budgeted for it? Yes. See, when you run a property legally, you set aside money for maintenance and repairs. You don't pocket deposit money and hope nothing breaks. I can't believe this is happening. Believe it. I tapped the papers on my desk. You have 1 week to remove your belongings. After that, I'm changing all locks and security codes. If you interfere with building operations, if you contact any current tenants, if you cause any problems, I'll file every complaint I've documented. Do you understand? He nodded slowly. Good. There's one more thing. I slid a final document across the desk. Your severance agreement. It absolves you of any future claims to the property, waives your right to contest the foreclosure, and includes a non-disparagement clause. Sign it and we're done. Don't sign it, and this gets complicated. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. I never imagined you'd actually. I know. That was your mistake. I watched him sign, each letter carved with bitter defeat. You assumed I'd be too scared, too poor, too old to fight back. You assumed wrong. After Kenneth signed, he sat motionless for several seconds. Then, quietly, can I ask you something? What? Are you going to give the other tenants their deposits back? The ones I kept. I hadn't expected the question. Why do you care? I don't. He rubbed his face. I'm trying to understand if you're doing this to help people or just to hurt me. Can't it be both? He almost smiled. I guess so. He stood, the signed agreement in his hand. For what it's worth, I am sorry. About your deposit. About all of it. I studied his face, looking for sincerity. What I found was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine regret. You're sorry you got caught. That's not the same thing. Maybe not. He walked to the door, paused. The tenants in Unit 7, the ones with the leaking roof. There's a family with a baby. I kept meaning to fix it, but he trailed off. Just fix it soon. Please. Then he left, and I sat alone in my small office trying to process what had just happened. Kenneth Winters, who'd seemed so invincible 3 months ago, had just walked out of my office defeated. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. And purposeful. There was work to do. I pulled out my tenant files and started making a list. Every security deposit Kenneth had illegally kept. Every name, every amount, every unit number. Bethany had connected me with 2 other former tenants through a support group. Between their records and Kenneth's sloppy files, I was able to piece together most of the theft. Total: 14 tenants robbed over 3 years. Amount: $18,600. I called Bernard. I need to set up a repayment fund. How quickly can we do that? Over the next month, I worked methodically through my list. I contacted every former tenant Kenneth had stolen from, explaining that I'd purchased the building and was reviewing past deposit practices. Most were shocked. Some were suspicious. All were grateful. You're really giving me my deposit back? Bethany asked when I called her. After 2 years? You're really giving me my deposit back? After 2 years. Yes. With interest. She cried on the phone. I can't believe this. I thought that money was just gone forever. So did Kenneth. That was his mistake. I sent checks through certified mail, each one accompanied by a letter apologizing for the delay and explaining the situation. Most recipients wrote back. Some sent thank you notes. One woman, a single mother, called to tell me the money meant she could finally afford winter clothes for her kids. Those moments made everything worth it. Every risk I'd taken, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, all of it was worth seeing justice actually happen. But I wasn't done. The current tenants still living in the building deserved better conditions. I hired contractors to fix the leaking roof in Unit 7 first, then moved on to the heating issues, the electrical problems, all the maintenance Kenneth had ignored. It was expensive, exhausting, sometimes overwhelming. But I'd bought this building for a reason, and that reason wasn't just revenge. It was to prove that properties could be run ethically, that landlords could treat tenants with dignity, that doing the right thing was possible even if it was harder. 3 weeks after repairs began, the tenant in Unit 7, the woman with the baby Kenneth had mentioned, knocked on my office door. Ms. Hale? I just wanted to say thank you. For fixing our roof. For everything. You're welcome. Mr. Winters never would have done this. He didn't care. I know. That's why I'm here. She smiled, tears in her eyes. You're a good landlord. Those words meant more than she could know. 2 months after the auction, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello. Ms. Hill, this is Officer Parsons from the Housing Authority. I'm calling about the audit we conducted on Kenneth Winters' former properties. My stomach tightened. Yes. Your complaint was instrumental in uncovering a pattern of violations across multiple properties he owned. Thanks to your documentation, we've been able to pursue charges of tenant fraud, illegal deposit retention, and code violation negligence. He paused. I wanted to personally thank you. Most people don't follow through the way you did. I just wanted my deposit back. He chuckled. Well, you got a bit more than that. We're awarding you restitution from the administrative fines, $1,200, plus 6 months interest. My deposit. Finally. After 3 months of foreclosure auction and buying an entire building, I was getting my original $1,200 back. The irony was perfect. Thank you, I said. No, Miss Hill. Thank you. People like Winters operate because people like you usually give up. You didn't. After hanging up, I sat thinking about that. He was right. Everything Kenneth had built depended on tenants giving up, accepting defeat, believing they had no power. The system was designed to protect landlords over tenants, property over people. But systems could be beaten. Not easily, not quickly, but methodically, legally, with patience and documentation and refusal to accept injustice. A week later, the check arrived. $1,247.89. My deposit plus interest, paid by the city from Kenneth's fines. I deposited it into the building's maintenance fund. Full circle. 6 months after buying the building, I sat in my small office reviewing quarterly financials. The property was profitable, not hugely, but steadily. Repairs were completed. All units were occupied. Tenants paid rent on time because I'd created a place they wanted to live. I'd also started something new, a tenant rights workshop held quarterly in the building's common room, teaching people about security deposits, lease agreements, code violations, their legal protections, empowering them with knowledge Kenneth would have hated them having. Bethany came to the first one. So did 3 other former Kenneth tenants. We shared stories, reviewed legal rights, built a small community of people who refused to be exploited. My daughter visited one afternoon, looking around the building with obvious pride. "Mom, I have to admit, I thought you were crazy. Risking your retirement, buying a building, all of it. But you actually did it." "I did. You proved everyone wrong." "No. I proved Kenneth wrong. Everyone else I didn't care about." She hugged me. "I'm proud of you." Those words settled something inside me that had been unsettled for 3 months. I'd made the right choice. Risky, unconventional, maybe even a little bit crazy, but right. That evening, I received one final email from Kenneth. Short, simple, *you won. I get it now. Good luck with the building *. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He'd said everything that mattered in those 9 words. I closed my laptop and looked around my office. At the tenant files organized alphabetically. At the maintenance schedule posted on the wall. At the framed copy of my building's deed. Kenneth had thought I was too old, too poor, too powerless to fight him. He'd assumed wrong on every count. He'd kept my $1,200 deposit thinking it was free money. Instead, it cost him everything. And me? I got more than my deposit back. I got justice. I got purpose. I got a building full of people who deserved better and were finally getting it. I thought about that last moment in my old apartment, keys on the counter, Kenneth smirking at me. If I could go back and tell that version of myself what was coming, she wouldn't believe it. But that was okay. Neither would Kenneth. I turned off my office light and locked the door behind me. Tomorrow would bring new maintenance requests, new tenant questions, new challenges. But tonight, I just walked to my car feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Kenneth Winters had tried to steal from me. Instead, he taught me exactly how much power I actually had. And for that lesson, however unintentionally given, I was almost grateful.